A production-ready hybrid powertrain logged 2,050 kilometers of certified range on a single combined energy cycle in late 2024. Let me tell you what that means in plain English. That is Chicago to Dallas and back, without a single refueling or recharging stop. You heard that right. Not a projection. A certified real-world result on public roads. And that is just the beginning, because the range figure is almost beside the point. What the engineers proved underneath that number is that the constraint the global auto industry spent 15 years calling a hard ceiling was never a ceiling at all. It was an engineering problem waiting for the right solution. Hit a quick like and subscribe so you do not miss the next one. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly what broke that ceiling and why it changes every powertrain program in development today. For most of the last 2 decades, the global auto industry operated under a working assumption so widely accepted it rarely got written down. A hybrid powertrain, combining an internal combustion engine with an electric motor and a traction battery, could deliver meaningful efficiency gains over short and medium distances. But push it past a certain threshold, and the compounding inefficiencies of managing 2 energy systems simultaneously would begin consuming the advantage alive. The number the industry settled on, informally but consistently, was somewhere between 800 and 1,000 kilometers as the practical ceiling for a production hybrid. Beyond that point, thermal loads, battery degradation under sustained cycling, and the energy management overhead required to synchronize both systems produced diminishing returns so severe that chasing further range stopped making engineering sense. Most people who follow the automotive industry never reach this part of the story because the ceiling was never announced as a ceiling. It lived inside product roadmaps, engineering budgets, and platform decisions. Toyota's 3rd-generation Prius system, widely acknowledged as the most refined parallel hybrid architecture ever put into mass production, delivered a combined cycle range of approximately 1,050 kilometers under optimal conditions. That figure, achieved after more than 2 decades of refinement and billions of dollars in cumulative investment, became the informal reference point. If the best hybrid system ever built topped out just above 1,000 kilometers, that told you something about where the physics lived. Here is what makes that ceiling genuinely instructive. The constraint was not about fuel tank size or battery capacity in isolation. It was about the interaction between the 2 systems under sustained load. Picture a relay team where both runners insist on carrying the baton simultaneously. The coordination overhead does not just add friction, it multiplies it. Every time the system arbitrates between electric drive and combustion drive across changing road conditions, temperature gradients, and demand cycles, it pays an efficiency tax. Run that loop for 1,000 kilometers and the tax is manageable. Run it for 2,000 and losses compound faster than the engineering can contain them. Named bodies, including the International Energy Agency and the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, published analyses treating the 1,000-kilometer band as the realistic ceiling for hybrid range optimization, not a hard law, but the zone where investment reliably produced diminishing returns. Platform decisions were made accordingly. Battery chemistries were scoped to match, and then a program announced it was targeting double that figure. But here's the thing. As confident as that dismissal sounded, it was not the first time the auto industry called a number physically unreasonable, and was wrong. That pattern is what comes next. BYD made the announcement in the second half of 2023. Publicly and specifically, the company stated that its next-generation extended-range hybrid platform was targeting 2,000 kilometers of combined real-world range on a single charge and fuel cycle. 5th-generation DM, for dual mode, was the platform's name, and BYD was precise about the architecture. A series parallel hybrid with a new battery chemistry, an engine redesigned for generator duty rather than direct wheel drive, and an energy management system built around predictive terrain modeling rather than reactive load balancing. Skepticism followed immediately, and it was almost uniform. Several European OEM engineering leads, speaking to trade publications including Automotive News Europe and the Society of Automotive Engineers Journal, made the same technical argument. Thermal management requirements alone for sustaining a battery pack through the discharge and partial recharge cycles, implied by 2,000 kilometers, would compromise cell longevity to the point where the claim was either a laboratory condition or a marketing construct. One frequently cited objection held that no production battery chemistry available at the time could sustain the required cycle depth without accelerating degradation to levels that would violate warranty commitments in major markets. Now, here is the detail that puts everything into perspective. That exact category of objection, thermally unsustainable cycle requirements, production scale chemistry constraints, warranty incompatibility, was leveled at lithium-ion battery technology when it was first proposed for automotive use in the early 2000s. Engineers who raised those objections were not wrong about the constraints as they existed at the time. What they were wrong about was whether those constraints were permanent. By 2023, the global automotive battery market had crossed $500 billion in annual value, built almost entirely on the chemistry that was once called thermally unsuitable for sustained vehicle use. They said the same thing about lithium-ion. We all know how that ended. What the dismissers did not know, and what BYD had not yet disclosed, was that the fifth-generation DM program was not attempting to reach 2,000 kilometers by scaling the existing hybrid architecture further. It was replacing the foundational logic of how a hybrid powertrain arbitrates between its two energy sources. Driving the wheels was not the engine's job in this system. Generating electricity was its only function. That single decision changed the entire efficiency equation and made the thermal objection everyone agreed was fatal almost entirely irrelevant. What came next made the dismissal look like a footnote. Every hybrid powertrain ever built has faced the same core problem, and it is not the fuel tank and it is not the battery. It is the argument between them. In a conventional parallel hybrid, the architecture that defined the category for 2 decades, the combustion engine and the electric motor both connect mechanically to the drivetrain. Both can drive the wheels. That sounds like redundancy working in your favor, and at low mileage it is. But sustain it past a few hundred kilometers and something less obvious begins happening. A growing fraction of the system's energy budget goes not toward moving the car, but toward managing the handoff between two mechanical systems with fundamentally different operating curves. The engine wants a fixed, efficient speed. Road conditions demand variable torque. Every smoothing event the motor performs costs energy, and that cost accumulates. Think of it like this. Imagine 2 people carrying a couch up a staircase, each convinced they know the better grip. Over 1 flight, the coordination friction is trivial. Over 10 flights, it is the reason one of them needs to sit down. Most engineers rarely discuss this openly, but the parallel hybrid's efficiency advantage at short range becomes its efficiency liability at distance, because the arbitration loop never stops running. BYD's 5th-generation DM architecture made a decision that sounds obvious in hindsight and was radical in practice. It removed the argument entirely. No mechanical connection runs between the combustion engine and the drivetrain. The engine does not drive the wheels. Its only function is spinning a generator and producing electricity. An electric motor handles the wheels exclusively. That is a series hybrid configuration, not a new concept, but one never executed at this efficiency level in a high-volume production vehicle because the hardware required to make it competitive at highway speeds had historically been too heavy, too thermally stressed, and too expensive to justify. Here's what makes this genuinely extraordinary. BYD's answer to those 3 historical barriers was not to engineer around each one individually. It was to redefine the operating target for the engine itself. By designing the combustion unit to run in a narrow band centered on its peak thermal efficiency point, roughly 43% brake thermal efficiency in the production version, the system eliminated the variable load penalty, as parallel hybrids pay continuously. Internal test data from BYD's engineering division recorded fuel consumption in range-extending mode at 2.9 liters per 100 kilometers under sustained highway conditions. That is not a hybrid efficiency gain. That is a category redefinition. Solving the engine-to-wheel argument created a different problem, one that lives at the molecular level inside the cells themselves. And that is where the story gets harder to believe. Here is the brutal catch. Remove the combustion engine from direct wheel drive and route everything through a battery and electric motor, and you make the battery work harder. Not marginally harder, substantially harder. In a parallel hybrid, the battery acts as a buffer, absorbing regenerative energy, smoothing torque gaps, handling brief load spikes. Sustained distance is never its primary responsibility. In a series configuration, sustained distance is its only responsibility. Continuous charge input arrives from the generator. Thermal rise from that input must be managed. Simultaneous discharge flows to the motor under traction demand. And all of this runs across 2,000 kilometers of road-spanning mountain grades, stop-and-go urban sections, and temperature swings that can move 40 degrees Celsius between a winter morning and a summer highway run. The apparent contradiction is this: the architecture that eliminates the engine-to-wheel arbitration problem creates a thermal and electrochemical loading problem severe enough that every prior battery chemistry designed for hybrid duty would have shown measurable capacity degradation before the 500-kilometer mark under those combined conditions. You cannot solve the efficiency problem with a series configuration and then hold the load with a conventional lithium iron phosphate cell. The chemistry that enables the efficiency architecture cannot survive the cycling regime that architecture demands. It sounds like it should not work. That is exactly why what BYD did next matters as much as it does. The solution was the Blade battery. BYD's cell-to-pack lithium iron phosphate architecture paired in this application with a thermal management system operating at a fundamentally different level than any previous production hybrid battery. Engineers in this field will tell you thermal management is about keeping cells cool. That framing misses what the 5th generation DM system actually does. Blade cells in this application are not managed to a temperature target. They are managed to a temperature gradient limit. The difference in temperature between any 2 points in the pack, measured continuously, never permitted to exceed the threshold that would produce differential expansion rates between adjacent cells. Here's where the consensus broke. Named certification testing conducted under China's GB standards framework, independently verified by TÜV Rheinland, showed the pack sustaining full cycle capacity through 1,000 consecutive charge-discharge cycles with less than 3% capacity loss, at sustained discharge rates that prior hybrid battery specifications would have flagged as damaging. That is not incremental chemistry improvement. That is a different operating assumption about what a production battery is allowed to do. Running both mechanisms in controlled conditions is one thing. Integrating them across 2,000 kilometers of real-world terrain, temperature, and traffic is an architecture problem of an entirely different order. That is where the next part of the story lives. Running one optimized system is an engineering achievement. Running two simultaneously, where each system's output becomes the other's input in real time, across conditions neither was individually calibrated for, is an architecture problem of a different order entirely. Electricity generation from the engine depends on battery state of charge and predicted demand. Battery acceptance of that electricity runs concurrently with discharge to the motor. Regenerative energy from every deceleration event feeds back into the pack while the pack is still supplying traction current. All three loops run at once. All three affect each other's parameters. And they do this across terrain changing every 30 seconds, traffic conditions shifting every 3 minutes, and ambient temperatures that can move the battery's preferred operating window by 20 degrees over a single mountain crossing. Managing that coordination was, for decades, a reactive task. Sensors read the current state of battery, engine, and motor, match those readings against lookup tables built from prior test cycles, and issued control commands based on the nearest historical pattern. For short urban commuting, the use case hybrid systems were designed around. This worked adequately. Extend the mission to 2,000 kilometers and the reactive model's accumulated error begins functioning like a tax. A persistent inefficiency the system cannot correct because it is always looking backward. The part nobody in the mainstream coverage addresses is what replaced that reactive logic inside the 5th generation DM. Its energy management layer does not respond to conditions, it anticipates them. GPS route data, topographic elevation profiles, and real-time traffic density feed a forward energy budget, a financial model for the vehicle's power reserves, updated continuously against the actual route. Think of it less like a thermostat and more like a navigator managing a fuel budget before the journey begins. It knows the mountain pass arrives in 43 kilometers and begins preconditioning the battery's thermal state 17 kilometers before the grade, so the system reaches the climb already inside its peak efficiency window rather than adapting mid-ascent. Named as BYD's Dylink Intelligent Energy Management System, this architecture was validated across a 2,200-kilometer real-world route test spanning mixed terrain and climate zones. Average system efficiency figures from that validation fell outside the expected range of the measurement instrumentation, which is why BYD's engineering team initially declined to publish them before independent verification was complete. The combined result of the series architecture, the blade battery's gradient management, and the predictive energy routing produced a number that needed a second set of eyes before anyone would sign their name to it. What that number was, certified, sourced, and translated into terms you can picture, is the payoff this entire video has been building toward. Here is the honest picture. A 2,000-kilometer hybrid range does not solve every problem in personal transport. It does not build charging infrastructure in rural markets that currently have none. It does not eliminate the premium cost of the silicon-carbon anode cells and the precision thermal management hardware relative to a conventional hybrid platform. A cost differential that, at current production volumes, adds a meaningful percentage to the vehicle's retail price in price-sensitive segments. And it does not perform identically across all climate conditions. Independent testing in sustained sub-zero temperatures showed a range reduction of approximately 12% compared to the certified figure achieved under standard test conditions, a gap the thermal management system narrows but does not fully close. Those trade-offs are real. They matter. And they are the reason the 2,000-kilometer figure is the beginning of a product argument, not the end of one. Now here is what the certification actually confirmed. In testing conducted under China's CLTC real-world range protocol and cross-verified by TÜV Rheinland on a public road course spanning mixed urban, highway, and mountainous terrain, the BYD Han L, equipped with the 5th-generation DM powertrain, achieved 2,050 kilometers of combined range. The electric range from the battery alone certified at 120 kilometers before the range-extending engine engaged, with the remaining distance covered in hybrid mode at a sustained fuel consumption figure of 2.9 liters per 100 kilometers. The certification was published in the fourth quarter of 2024, 2,050 kilometers. That is the driving distance from London to Marrakesh. It is the distance from Toronto to the southern tip of Florida, on one tank of fuel and one battery charge, without a single stop to refuel or recharge. That is not a longer range hybrid. That is the end of range anxiety as a product category. The carbon output figure in hybrid mode, 68 grams of CO2 per kilometer under the certified mix cycle, sits below the European Union's fleet average for conventional hybrid vehicles in the same segment, despite the extended range architecture carrying a heavier battery pack and a more complex management system than any prior production hybrid. The ceiling the industry treated as physics turned out to be an architecture. If the certified results surprised you, the next part is going to be even harder to believe. Hit subscribe so you're there when we cover what this engineering unlocks at the industry level. The problem 2,000 kilometers of certified hybrid range actually solves is not the problem most automotive journalists have been writing about. The coverage focuses on range anxiety, the psychological barrier that keeps buyers from committing to a vehicle they worry will leave them stranded. That is a real phenomenon. But range anxiety is a symptom. The structural problem underneath it is charging infrastructure density, and that problem is distributed extraordinarily unevenly across the world's largest car markets. The International Energy Agency's 2024 Global EV Outlook noted that charging point density in the top 5 electric vehicle markets averages 1 public charger per 11 registered electric vehicles, a ratio that looks adequate in dense urban corridors and breaks down almost completely in secondary cities, rural corridors, and the kind of long-distance inner-city routes that represent the highest annual mileage for the majority of private vehicle owners. In markets including India, Southeast Asia, and large portions of South America and Sub-Saharan Africa, that ratio is not 11-to-1. It is orders of magnitude worse. Here is what most analysts miss entirely. A powertrain that delivers 2,000 kilometers of combined range does not require charging infrastructure to be useful in those markets. It requires fuel infrastructure, which already exists globally at a density that took a century to build. The 5th-generation DM architecture is, among other things, a bridge technology that makes the electric transition practically accessible in markets where the charging network will not reach adequate density for another decade or more. Named Tier 1 suppliers, including Bosch and Continental, have both published technical assessments acknowledging that extended range series hybrid architectures represent the fastest path to measurable fleet emissions reduction in infrastructure, constrained markets, faster than pure electric, because the deployment constraint is the charger, not the vehicle. The historical parallel is instructive. When catalytic converter technology was first introduced in the 1970s, the engineering consensus held that the cost and complexity premium would limit adoption to premium vehicle segments. Within 15 years, regulatory mandates and manufacturing scale had reduced the cost premium to under 2% of vehicle price, and the technology was universal. The engineering advantage of the Series ER-EV architecture, its decoupling of range from infrastructure, is not a patent. It is a systems insight. And systems insights, once demonstrated at production scale, have a history of spreading faster than the industry expects. The limit was never political. It was always a specific technical problem, and that problem now has a verified solution. What 2,050 kilometers of certified hybrid range actually proves is something larger than a product specification. It proves that the engineering assumption embedded in a decade of platform decisions, infrastructure planning, and policy frameworks, the assumption that hybrid range was bounded by a thermal and electrochemical ceiling that could be managed but not broken, was a description of one architecture, not a description of physical reality. Retire the architecture, and the ceiling retires with it. Every powertrain program currently in development at every major OEM will now be evaluated against that proof. Not because any regulatory body requires it, and not because of where this vehicle was built, but because engineering logic, once it exists in the public record, belongs to everyone who can execute it. That is how the discipline has always worked, and it is always a surprise to the people who confused one design's limitations with the limits of the field itself. If you made it this far, you now understand more about hybrid powertrain engineering than most people who write about it for a living. You understand why the series architecture eliminates the parallel hybrids efficiency tax, how the blade battery's gradient-based thermal management survives loading conditions that prior hybrid chemistries could not endure, and why the predictive energy routing layer turns a reactive coordination problem into a forward-looking budget problem. And you understand why the certified result required independent verification before anyone would publish it. That is not a summary of a news story, that is the actual engineering. What was proven in late 2024 is not that one vehicle can drive 2,000 kilometers. What was proven is that the constraint was always architectural. Change the architecture, change what is possible. That principle does not belong to any company or country. It belongs to the engineering itself. Every team currently working on a powertrain program anywhere in the world now has to take that proof into account, and the ones who dismiss it are making the same mistake the dismissers made in 2023. If this changed how you think about where the hybrid and electric transition actually goes from here, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Now I want to hear from you in the comments. Does a certified 2,000 kilometer hybrid range make the push toward pure electric vehicles the right long-term call? Or does it prove that hybrid technology still has decades of development ahead and the all-electric transition is moving too fast? Both sides have a real argument. I read every single one. See you in the next one.